16th of December 1944. Nazi Germany launches its final, desperate offensive on the Western Front. In the snowy forests of Belgium, 22 American soldiers stand in the path of an entire SS Panzer Division. Cut off and outnumbered, they dig in on a ridge above the village of Lanzerath. As German paratroopers flood the forest, the Americans hold their ground. Their stand stalls Hitler's spearhead and rewrites the course of the Battle of the Bulge. Yet for decades, their story remains unknown. By December 1944, Nazi Germany's situation had grown increasingly dire. American, British, and Canadian forces had liberated France and were pressing against Germany's western border, while the Red Army advanced relentlessly from the east. The Third Reich was being squeezed between two powerful military forces, and Hitler knew he was running out of options. In this moment of desperation, Hitler devised what would become his final major offensive on the Western Front, a bold, all-or-nothing gamble known as the Ardennes Offensive. The Allies would later call it the Battle of the Bulge, named after the massive bulge the German advance created in their front lines. Hitler's plan targeted the densely forested Ardennes region along the borders of Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. The area was thinly defended by inexperienced or exhausted American units who considered it an unlikely site for a major offensive due to its rugged terrain. Hitler intended to exploit this vulnerability by punching through the American lines with overwhelming force, then racing northwest to seize the vital port city of Antwerp. Capturing Antwerp would serve two critical goals: severing the primary supply port for Allied armies in northwest Europe and splitting their forces. This would trap British and Canadian armies in the north while isolating American units in the south. Hitler believed this might fracture the Allied coalition and force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace, allowing Germany to concentrate its remaining strength against the Soviets. To carry out the plan, the German military secretly assembled a massive force along a 60-mile front. Roughly 200,000 troops, 600 tanks, and 1,900 artillery pieces. It was the greatest concentration of German combat power since the early years of the war. Leading the charge were elite SS Panzer Divisions, including the infamous 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. The Germans maintained remarkable secrecy by moving troops only at night and enforcing strict radio silence. In December 1944, heavy fog, snow, and low cloud cover grounded Allied aircraft, stripping them of crucial air superiority and masking German movements. To prepare their forces psychologically, German commanders portrayed American soldiers as undisciplined and weak-willed with no stomach for real war, a wildly inaccurate claim meant to boost morale. The timetable was extraordinarily ambitious. German High Command expected their armored spearheads to break through American lines on the first day and reach the Meuse River by day 3. From there, they would drive another 60 miles to Antwerp. The schedule drew inspiration from Germany's 1940 blitzkrieg through the same region, but ignored the dramatically different circumstances of 1944. The offensive began in the early hours of December 16, 1944, achieving near-total tactical surprise. A thunderous artillery barrage at 5:30 a.m. stunned American forces, who had received no warning of the massive attack. For several critical hours, Allied High Command was uncertain about the scale and purpose of the German operation. With aerial reconnaissance grounded by poor weather, crucial German movements went undetected. Allied commanders had dismissed intelligence warnings, convinced that Germany lacked the resources to launch a major offensive. According to the German plan, the 6th SS Panzer Army under SS General Sepp Dietrich would form the northern arm of the attack, pushing through the Loschheim Gap toward the Meuse. The 5th Panzer Army, led by General Hasso von Manteuffel, would take the center, while the 7th Army protected the southern flank. Standing in the path of the German onslaught was a small American unit, stationed on a strategic ridge near the Belgian village of Lanzerath. The American unit consisted of two 9-man squads from the 394th Infantry Regiment's Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon, joined by 4 forward artillery observers who had been temporarily assigned to their position. These young soldiers had no idea they were about to face the full force of Germany's opening assault. Their position lay directly in the path of elite German paratroopers tasked with clearing the way for the 1st SS Panzer Division, the spearhead of Hitler's offensive. What happened next would become one of the most remarkable defensive actions in military history. The American soldiers about to confront the spearhead of Hitler's massive offensive were far from typical frontline troops. They were a specialized unit focused more on gathering intelligence than fighting pitched battles. These men were chosen for their sharp marksmanship, physical endurance, and ability to operate independently behind enemy lines. Their duties normally involved setting up observation posts, patrolling enemy territory, and relaying critical information back to headquarters. Leading the small unit was First Lieutenant Lyle J. Book Jr., a baby-faced officer whose youthful looks masked a surprising depth of experience. At just 20 years old, Book was one of the youngest platoon commanders in the U.S. Army. His military journey had begun early. He enlisted in the Missouri National Guard at just 14 during the Great Depression to help support his family. By 16, he had already become a supply sergeant. After Pearl Harbor, he attended Officer Candidate School, graduating in the top 10 of his class in 1942. His stellar performance earned him a commission in the newly formed 99th Infantry Division, bound for Europe. Lanzerath Ridge rose like a natural watchtower over a key doorway through the Ardennes. Perched above the village of Lanzerath, it commanded a critical road junction within the northern sector of the Loschheim Gap, a natural corridor through the dense forest. Both the German 6th and 5th Panzer armies planned to drive their armored columns through this very route. From the ridge, the platoon had a sweeping view of the terrain leading eastward into Germany, an ideal position for observation. Despite their primary role as scouts, the I&R platoon had taken combat readiness seriously. They carried M1 Garand rifles and carbines, but had also added heavier weapons to their arsenal: Browning automatic rifles, anti-tank bazookas, and a 30 caliber light machine gun. Their armored jeep mounted a 50 caliber heavy machine gun capable of punching through light vehicles. They also stockpiled grenades and extra ammunition. These preparations, made with caution rather than expectation, would soon become their only lifeline. Along the edge of the forest overlooking Lanzerath, the Americans carefully fortified their position. They deepened existing foxholes and reinforced them with pine logs, transforming them into durable fighting positions. Their lines stretched roughly 300 yards along a shallow ridge, standing about 30 feet above the road in what soldiers called an enfilade position, allowing them to fire lengthwise into any advancing formation. A recent snowfall masked their positions, blending them seamlessly into the winter landscape. Just behind their line stood a small log cabin, serving multiple roles: warming shelter, observation post, and communications hub. A telephone line ran from the cabin to regimental headquarters, keeping them in contact with command. The platoon had rigged makeshift tripwires strung with cans filled with rocks to alert them to movement. Twice a day, Private Oakley made the journey from Hunningen in a jeep, bringing hot food, mail, and a brief touch of normalcy to the isolated ridge. There was a grim mismatch between the platoon's training and the mission they now faced. These were reconnaissance specialists, trained to observe and report, not to dig in and resist an armored assault. Yet here they were, positioned as the first and only line of defense against an overwhelming German attack. With just 22 men and whatever weapons they had scrounged together, they were about to face 500 elite paratroopers and armored units bent on breaking through the American lines. As dawn broke on December 16, 1944, an eerie stillness hung over the snow-covered Ardennes forest. On Lanzerath Ridge, 18 young Americans rotated through freezing foxholes and the relative warmth of their cabin, unaware they were minutes away from facing the full force of Hitler's last desperate gamble. The German offensive was about to begin with a thunderous artillery barrage. At exactly 5:30 a.m., the silence cracked open with the deafening roar of German artillery. The eastern horizon lit up as roughly 1,600 guns unleashed a coordinated barrage across an 80-mile front. The earth trembled beneath the American positions while shells screamed overhead, exploding with brutal force throughout the Ardennes. For 90 relentless minutes, the artillery barrage continued. The men burrowed deeper into their foxholes, thankful for the reinforced cover, pits lined with pine logs and packed with dirt that absorbed the worst of the nearby blasts. When the shelling finally tapered off, they were shaken but miraculously unharmed. Yet one critical line had been severed. Their telephone connection to regimental headquarters was dead. As the barrage faded, an eerie spectacle unfolded. Behind their lines, German forces activated massive searchlights, angling their beams upward to reflect off the low-hanging clouds. The result was a ghostly, artificial moonlight that dimly lit the battlefield, enough to guide the attackers, but too diffused for defenders to accurately target. Through the thinning echoes of artillery fire, Lieutenant Book and his men scanned the landscape with binoculars. As the first light of dawn broke, they spotted columns of infantry advancing through the Loschheim area. The unmistakable silhouette of their helmets revealed their identity: Fallschirmjäger, German paratroopers. The sight left no doubt they were staring down the spearhead of a full-scale offensive. Grasping the severity of the situation, Buck reached regimental headquarters by radio. He reported the advancing enemy and asked what to do. The reply came back firm and immediate. "Remain in position. Reinforcements from the 3rd Battalion are on their way." Though he knew the odds were daunting, Buck chose to obey and prepare for what was coming. By full daylight, the platoon watched German troops pour into Lanzerath village below. The soldiers counted more and more men gathering, numbers that far exceeded what a single platoon could possibly resist. The reality set in. They were directly in the path of a major assault. From their elevated perch, the Americans had a commanding view of the open pasture that stretched between them and the village. Any German advance would have to cross that exposed ground. Fortunately, the snow concealed their foxholes so well that they were nearly invisible from below. A 4-foot barbed wire fence cutting through the field offered a perfect aiming marker. Their ridge position created an ideal setup to fire along the length of an advancing force instead of head-on. Behind them, the thick forest acted as a natural defense, shielding them from any easy flanking attempt. As the morning wore on, Buck and his men watched German officers rallying troops for an assault up the ridge. Quietly, the Americans checked their weapons and passed around ammunition. 18 men, facing odds of more than 25 to 1, braced to confront Hitler's finest. The stage was set for one of the most remarkable and unexpected defensive stands of the entire war. The German troops advancing toward Lanzerath Ridge were part of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, under the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, units once known as elite paratroopers. By December 1944, however, their ranks were a mix of hardened veterans and raw recruits, many facing combat for the first time. Still, they carried cutting-edge weapons, including the STG-44 assault rifle and rifle grenades. Their commanders, bolstered by misleading intelligence and propaganda, promised little American resistance, fueling a dangerous overconfidence on the eve of the assault. The German commander made a critical error, one that would give the vastly outnumbered Americans a fighting chance. Relying on flawed intelligence and propaganda that painted the US troops as weak and unwilling to fight, he grossly underestimated the determination of the defenders at Lanzerath Ridge. The misjudgment led to a fatal tactical mistake, ordering a direct frontal assault across open, snow-covered terrain toward a fortified position on elevated ground, an act that defied the most basic principles of military strategy. Hidden along the forest's edge, Lieutenant Bock and his men watched as roughly 80 German paratroopers gathered at the outskirts of Lanzerath village. Instead of maneuvering through the woods or using the terrain to their advantage, the enemy formed into 3 rigid columns and began advancing upright through the snow-covered pasture. Buck made the tactical decision to hold fire until the Germans reached a barbed wire fence halfway between the village and the American line. When the enemy reached the mark, Buck gave the signal. In an instant, the American line exploded with fire. The opening volley was brutal. Fire from Browning automatic rifles, M1 Garands, and a .50 caliber machine gun ripped through the tight German formation. Dozens went down in seconds. Survivors dove for what little cover the uneven field offered, but it was too exposed. Caught off guard, the Germans fired wildly into the tree line, their shots blind and ineffective. From below, the American foxholes were almost invisible. Rattled and bloodied, the remaining paratroopers retreated to the village, leaving a trail of dead and wounded across the snow. The pristine white landscape was now streaked with red. German medics tried to reach the injured, but each movement drew American fire, making rescue efforts perilous and often impossible. Undeterred by the bloodshed, the German commander remained convinced that he could break the American line. He ordered a second frontal assault, again across the same exposed field. Just as before, Buck's men held their fire until the enemy reached the fence. And just as before, they unleashed another wave of devastating gunfire. More paratroopers fell. The second assault disintegrated as quickly as the first. By midday, the snow-covered field between Lanzerath village and the American line was carpeted with German dead and wounded. As the afternoon wore on, Lieutenant Buck and his men understood the growing peril they faced. They had repelled multiple frontal assaults and, for the moment, accomplished the impossible, but they were still vastly outnumbered and completely isolated. The opening artillery barrage had severed their phone lines, and radio contact with headquarters was unreliable at best. Now German paratroopers were shifting tactics, flanking the platoon through the surrounding forest and attempting to seal off every route of escape. From all sides came the sound of German voices. Their position on Lanzerath Ridge was hanging by a thread. The INR platoon now faced a critical problem. Their ammunition was running dangerously low. Each man had begun the day with a standard combat load, about 120 rounds per rifle, 300 for the Browning automatic rifle and several bandoliers of 50 caliber rounds for the heavy machine gun. But after hours of unrelenting combat, those reserves were nearly gone. Confronted with this stark reality, Lieutenant Bock tightened their defensive posture. He ordered strict fire discipline, no wasted bullets, no blind firing, only pull the trigger if the target was in sight. The Americans rotated between firing positions, keeping up a continuous defense while giving each soldier fleeting moments to reload and recover. Private Johnson's hands shook with exhaustion as he counted the few rounds left in his pouch, barely enough for another German push. Lieutenant Bock tried to reach artillery support through the SCR 300 radio, hoping a barrage might stall the German advance, but the call never went through. Their outpost sat outside the boundaries of their regiment, division and corps, low priority in the chaos of the broader offensive. Then came the final blow. A German sniper's bullet struck the radio as Bock held it to his ear, silencing their only hope for reinforcements. As the hours dragged on, the psychological strain deepened. The Americans fought through bone-deep fatigue, their limbs numb with cold, eyes stinging from smoke and sleeplessness. Across the line, the Germans, despite their numbers, were stunned by the stubbornness of this tiny force. Many of the German paratroop commanders lacked real ground combat experience. Instead of using their numbers strategically, they sent wave after wave in direct assaults, tactics that proved costly. What Lieutenant Bock and his men couldn't know was the scale of their impact. Their stand had thrown a wrench into the German timetable. The mighty 1st SS Panzer Division sat idle, waiting for the paratroopers to clear the road through Lanzerath and onward to the Meuse River bridges. By late afternoon on December 16th, the fight had raged for nearly 10 relentless hours. The 22 Americans had inflicted staggering losses on the enemy, but the cost was mounting. Ammunition was nearly gone. Each man counted his remaining rounds, knowing that once they ran out, their defense would collapse. Darkness crept over the snowbound Ardennes. Huddled in foxholes, surrounded on all sides, they braced for the next inevitable assault. Lieutenant Bock knew that the end was near, but prepared for one final stand. Frustrated by their failure to break through, the German paratroopers shifted tactics. They launched a coordinated three-pronged attack. One group continued the frontal assault while two others slipped through the dense forest to strike the flanks. With this maneuver, they exploited their numerical advantage, sending wave after wave against the dwindling American line. Advancing through roadside ditches and natural depressions, the Germans crept toward the foxholes, while the defenders held disciplined fire, picking off immediate threats. Private First Class William James risked his life to redistribute ammunition between foxholes, ensuring every position could hold out a little longer. Meanwhile, other platoon members rotated between firing positions to create the illusion of greater numbers, concealing just how thin their defenses had become. As night fell, the Germans finally broke through. Their flanking movements brought them in from angles the Americans couldn't cover. With ammunition nearly gone, German troops closing in from three sides, and several men wounded, the defenders were outmatched and out of options. In the final moments, German paratroopers reached the American foxholes. Lieutenant Bock, faced with the choice between mission and the lives of his men, made the agonizing decision to surrender. The battle had raged for nearly 20 hours, an extraordinary stand against overwhelming odds. When the Germans finally took the position, their officers were stunned to learn that they had been held off by just 22 men. They had assumed they were facing a much larger force, perhaps an entire company. For German commanders, the discovery was humiliating, especially after suffering between 60 and 92 casualties to defeat what turned out to be a token force. The Americans, in contrast, had lost only one man, artillery observer Billy Queen. German troops quickly occupied several homes in Lanzerath village, converting them into makeshift aid stations. One German medical officer treated the American wounded and acknowledged their courage. Meanwhile, SS Standartenführer Joachim Peiper's SS Panzer Division finally began pushing through Lanzerath towards St. Vith. Upon arrival, Peiper questioned the commander of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment about the unexpected resistance. He was told the woods had been heavily fortified with mines and prepared positions. But when Peiper investigated, he discovered that the nearby woods were empty. His frustration was obvious. The delay had severely disrupted his timetable. The full impact of the Americans' stand went far beyond the battlefield. Their 20-hour delay bought critical time for Allied forces to reinforce St. Vith, a key road junction in the German offensive. At 4:30 a.m. on December 17th, more than 18 hours behind schedule, the 1st SS Panzer Division finally departed Lanzerath. Their advance toward the Meuse River and Antwerp was now badly off track. That delay proved pivotal. It contributed directly to the failure of Hitler's Ardennes Offensive. By holding their ground, 18 reconnaissance soldiers had altered the course of a major battle. For them, the story was far from over. They faced captivity with no idea of the impact their resistance had made. Their heroism would remain in the shadows for decades before receiving the recognition it deserved. The extraordinary actions of the INR platoon at Lanzerath Ridge should have earned immediate recognition. Instead, their courage became one of the most overlooked stories of World War II, left unacknowledged for more than 3 decades. This long silence was the result of a series of unfortunate events, beginning with their capture and extending well beyond the war's end. After their surrender on December 16, 1944, the captured Americans began a brutal journey as prisoners of war. They were marched to Lanzerath, then crammed into boxcars bound for deeper into Germany. Lieutenant Buck endured especially horrific conditions, trapped in a cattle car with 71 other POWs without food or water and exposed to the bitter winter cold. By Christmas Day, 7 men in his car had died. Wounded platoon members, including Privates William James and Louis Khalil, were taken to German military hospitals. The survivors were scattered across several POW camps in Germany, primarily Stalag 13D in Nuremberg and later Stalag 13C in Hammelburg. Conditions were deplorable. Stalag 13C, for instance, housed over 1,500 prisoners in a space built for just 300. The men endured meager rations, rampant malnutrition, disease, and the constant weight of psychological strain. In March 1945, Task Force Baum, sent by General Patton, briefly liberated some prisoners from Hammelburg. But in the confusion, many, including Buck, were quickly recaptured. He remained a prisoner until just 1 week before Germany's surrender. When finally liberated, Buck was emaciated and suffering from hepatitis, requiring months of hospitalization. Most of his platoon shared similar physical deterioration. With the platoon members dispersed across various hospitals and rehabilitation centers, compiling a cohesive combat report was nearly impossible. Many, including Buck, saw their capture as a failure, not a victory, unaware of the significant role their stand had played in disrupting the German offensive. As the history of the Battle of the Bulge took shape, their story faded behind the better-known episodes like the defense of Bastogne and the Allied counterattack. Recognition finally began in 1965, when the US Army published its official World War II history. A brief mention of Buck's platoon caught the attention of Private William James, who reached out to Buck and urged him to pursue the recognition they deserved. Buck contacted his former division commander, Major General Walter E. Lauer, who nominated him for a Silver Star. Buck received the award in June 1966, but the victory was bittersweet. His men had still received nothing. Determined to change that, he began a campaign to secure recognition for the entire platoon. The turning point came when journalist Jack Anderson published a series of columns highlighting the bureaucratic roadblocks standing in the platoon's way. His reporting caught the eye of the New York Yankees owner, George Steinbrenner, who took the matter to House Speaker Thomas P. O'Neill, adding much-needed political momentum to the cause. Justice finally arrived on October 26, 1981. At a World War II Valor Awards ceremony held at Fort Myer, Virginia, the surviving members of the platoon were formally honored. Each man received the Presidential Unit Citation. In addition, 4 received the Distinguished Service Cross, 5 earned the Silver Star, and 9 were awarded the Bronze Star with the V device for valor. The 4 artillery observers who had fought alongside them were recognized as well. This long-overdue recognition established the INR platoon as the most decorated small unit for a single combat action in World War II. After 37 years, these once-forgotten heroes finally received the acknowledgement they had earned for their extraordinary courage and their pivotal role in one of the war's most critical battles. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. We hope you found this video informative. If you enjoyed learning about today's topic, make sure to check out our other video, What Happened to Germany's Weapons and Tanks After World War II. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more World War II content. And we'll see you in the next one.